You're listening to Changing Reality. Changing Reality, where we bend reality all across the world. Only on WQHS Radio. So, hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Changing Reality, a show that features phenomenal people from all walks of life who are, in essence, have or are changing their own reality. So, this show is on Penn's WQHS Radio, and through this show, it's something very exciting because we actually have the opportunity to sit down, talk to, and interview amazing individuals from entrepreneurs, business owners, industry leaders, social change makers, to even artists, musicians, and inspiring individuals from all across the world, and many of whom have spent some time here on the Penn campus too. And by hearing these inspiring stories and how others have grown and how their lives have unfolded, we can learn a little bit of nuggets of wisdom that we can apply in our own journeys to grow and shorten our learning curves in that process. And I wanted to do this show simply because I felt like there are a lot of people out there who do phenomenal things and make waves in the lives of those around them. And I'm very passionate about bringing those stories to light so that those lessons don't go unnoticed, that we can figure out how to do so in our own capacities too. And stories has always been something that has been very important to me. It's been very central to who I am. So, hi everyone, my name is Harsha, and I am your host of this show. Personally, I actually founded and run a social enterprise called Ascendance that I started in Malaysia, where I'm from, but today collaborates with not just our Malaysian Ministry of Education, but works with over 26 countries to provide alternative education platforms for any student who wants to change their reality, whether that's learning about entrepreneurship, financial literacy, capacity building. We work with students from elementary to college through various sessions, programs, experiential learning activities, and projects that help them discover their passion, learn about themselves and the world around them, and create their own careers while they're still in school. And we've been fortunate to date to work with over 50,000 students across 970 communities and have incubated countless number of student-run projects and social enterprises run by students aged 8 to 25 years old. So all of this has been possible because of stories. It's been because of kind individuals who've been willing to take their times out in, sessions like this to share with others about what are the stories that change their life. So if you have any specific questions, experiences that you want to explore, do reach out, let us know, and tell us what do you want to learn about. And hopefully this show will be that same platform for you to get the stories that you need to grow, change, and eventually, change the reality around you as well. So that brings us to our episode today. We have an amazing speaker with us today. He is someone who has had so many brilliant experiences across various industries and different parts of the world as well. He's an international business executive who today is also an interviewer of some of the most brilliant business and political leaders, primarily based out of Switzerland. At the same time, he has had a global presence, having resided in countries from not just Switzerland, but the USA, China, Singapore, Ecuador, Peru, and has worked and visited, I think, almost 70 countries worldwide. He has had an extensive career spanning everything from IT, sales, venture, now even in media, and many others as well. And of course, he is a Wharton MBA alumni who will be sharing with us his story as well. Without further ado, let's welcome our brilliant guest speaker to our virtual stage. So,
thank you for having me in your show.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. First of all, as I mentioned earlier, you have such a nice background, so I appreciate, you're on the go, you're talking to us. Thank you for taking the time out. Tell me about where you are right now so that we all know where, the picture's from.
Okay, I am in Switzerland, and I was traveling from Geneva to Basel, and I stopped on the way in a place called Olten for the show. So you can have a look. It's a nice small city in the middle of Switzerland.
Oh my God, that is amazing. I think this already became number one interview just for the scenery alone. But I'm sure your story is even better. But I really appreciate you speaking with us. I know you're someone who meets a lot of very influential business owners, thought leaders, even people in industry, in politics, and so on. So you are usually the interviewer. So you have a lot of, I'm sure, very hard-hitting questions, obviously. But for all of us, students who are looking at a career like yours, all around the world, meeting some really brilliant people every single day, all those different industries. It makes us wonder, where did you actually start? I know you had a very interesting background as well. I think I read somewhere that you actually, I think, like you grew up in places like not just Switzerland, but Japan and Mexico. So tell us a little bit about where you started in a sense. How were you like in the beginning part of your career before all this exciting and interesting things took place?
Okay, so my name is Phillipe D.Monnier. I am Swiss and Mexican, Swiss by my father and Mexican by my mother. I grew up in Japan, and I attended the public school in Japan. And I did my high school in Geneva, Switzerland. On my undergrad in Mexico, in Monterrey Tech. And then I worked for big Swiss companies, mostly SGS. On this company is very big, but it's not very well known. It has about 80,000 employees on affiliates in about more than 100 countries. And I was posted in different countries in Ecuador, in Peru. Then I traveled extensively for this company to Southeast Asia and Africa. And after that, I study at Wharton, the MBA, for 2 years.
Oh wow, very exciting. When you first, were going into such a big organization, what was your initial role? In a sense, 80,000 employees. That's amazing. And I know you were very successful in that organization itself. And it launched your career globally. So, what do you think were some of the things that what was, well, first of all, how did you feel going into such a huge organization? And also, what was it like to be able to stand out? How did you make sure that you were growing in an organization like that?
I think that I work in this organization in different countries, as I mentioned. I started as a what they call management trainee, and then I was in charge of one unit in Peru, and then I was what they call operational auditor for 2 years. This is when I travel extensively to many African countries, on Southeast Asian countries. And I think I felt very well in this organization because I think it is not known in the big public, but in the different countries we had, I would say we had a very big role in the economy of those countries. And we were a player in the economy. And in those countries like Peru, Ecuador, we had about 500 employees. And it was regarded, and we had, our job was to prevent capital flight from those countries. So we were, I would say, an important player in the country, and we were, I would say, on a daily basis in the press for positive or negative things.
Okay, very, very cool. And in such a huge responsibility and role, how did you first learn how to adapt to the different cultures of the countries that you're talking and understand the people in all these different parts of the world?
I don't think there is any secret, but when I was living in Latin America, it was Peru, Ecuador. It was also a little bit Chile and Brazil. So basically, I was speaking my mother tongue. So I didn't have any, I would say, at least difficulties to connect with people. And in Southeast Asia and Africa, the language was mostly English and French. So also, it was not a problem to communicate. But more important than the language, the key is to understand what drives people. And in my opinion, this is the same all over the world.
Very true. In your early stages, you said you were a management trainee at this company in a sense. When you first started, in a sense, um, how did you think about your career? What was the things that you wanted to do? Because eventually, you would go into venture, you'd go into all of these other things in a sense. Did you expect all of this as the way that you wanted your career to unfold, or how did you start planning as an individual in an organization? Because we have a lot of students now, they get their first role or they get their first major job, and they're not sure how exactly to navigate what's the next thing for them.
I think that my goal was to have a positive impact on my companies, on the society. And I think it was, I would say, very different from many of my classmates from Wharton. I would say when I was at the business school, I would say half of us was like me. We wanted to have an impact in organizations, small on big organization. On half of us wanted to make money at any cost. So I was part of the first category.
Yeah, I definitely see, some similarities and patterns. But why did you choose to go to Wharton in the first place? You really had a very exciting career, already in kind of the finance area. So why decide to go to Penn and Wharton? And how? Tell me a little bit about the experiences you had in Penn that helped steer your career.
I think that when I started working after undergrad, my undergrad was in Mexico. I had decided to go to business school. It was a firm objective. The only question was exactly when, on which universities. So I think as an engineer, it made a lot of sense for me to study an MBA, especially outside Mexico and outside Europe. So USA was a normal place for me. So I applied to 5 different schools. I got admitted at three. What I liked at Wharton was the fact that I had the impression it was a school of entrepreneur, not of people who are from very, I would say, established families. On the second part was that um, it was very international. 40% of the students were foreigners, while in most of the US school it was 20% at this time. So this was a positive point for me. I remember when I arrived at Wharton in Philadelphia, I took a taxi from the airport to the dormitory, and then I noticed so much poverty. It was unbelievable. Closed factories, people lying down in the street. So in the taxi, I was really thinking, yeah, maybe I made a mistake. Maybe I should not have come to the USA. Why do I? Why have I decided? Why did I save my 3 year saving to study in a place which is declining? I should have studied an MBA in Singapore or I don't know another place which is growing. So and then I entered the dormitories. Um, I remember I could not sleep during the night, partly because of the jet lag and partly because I was thinking whether it was a mistake for me to have studied at Wharton. And then we had a fire alarm. So we all ran down to the basement. And then I met basically everybody from my dormitories. And I made, I would say, immediately many friends. And then I would say the 2 years I spent at Wharton, it was really, I would say it was magnificent. I mean, basically we had 700 students in my year and 700 the year before after. I more or less knew everybody. And it was really, I would say, 2 years, 2 fantastic years. Except I would say the first day.
Oh my gosh, I cannot believe I love the way you mentioned it because I also had my shocks when I first came to the US after all the TV I watched. So definitely like I agree with that point, and I love the ability that you had to switch and meet the people and get in touch with the people. But I agree, Wharton is and Penn in general is just like an amazing place. You while you were in Penn, you weren't just a student, right? I think you did many exciting things. I think you're part of their multinational management club. You invited many CEOs from some of these companies, from Bank to I think like McKinsey, and like from all around the world. Why is it important while you are in an institution like while you're doing your MBA to actually get connected with the industry and actually to bring people like that together to support your fellow students? Why was that important for you, and how did it benefit you in the long run?
I think that the most important aspect of business or maybe society is the ability to deal with people much more than what we learn at school. On for this reason, all those extracurricular activities are extremely important. And they're also very. I mean, it was a pleasure. Yes, I organized more or less once per week an event. And we had many speakers. I remember we had the head of WTO, we had the CEO of Deutsche Bank, we had the former president of France, we had the CEO of IBM. It was on. We found a way to, even though we were a student organization, we found a way to attract, I would say, key leaders to participate in our events. And we had in every event maybe about 100 participants, which was not very easy because there were so many events at the same time. But yes, it was. It was. I think I spent more time doing those events, organizing those events, than studying.
I think that
Unfortunately, I didn't have to do interview. I mean, most of my classmates they did so many interviews, and in my case, I made close to no interview. So I used this time to organize events.
That's very smart. I personally think this is another form of internship. It's like a self-created internship, being able to line up events, meet speakers, organize like projects together. So definitely an option for all students who are, not doing internships to get more involved and so on. But how do you think, all of these experiences, what was the most important thing that you learned overall from Penn and Wharton that you think helped you in your career after that? I mean, after that, your career, you again traveled to different parts of the world. I think you spent some time in Switzerland and then in Hong Kong and Singapore. How do you think Penn prepared you? What did it give you to do things differently in your career afterwards?
I think that the brand name of Wharton is always a help. The fact that there is a very large network. Of course, you don't know many people personally, but if you find the right way to connect to people you don't know because they study at Wharton, I think it is a great advantage. I would say to some extent the knowledge, and I think that in those business schools, especially the MBA, we learn more from our classmates and from our professors.
Mhm. Yep, yep. I, I like that take on it in a sense. You went into, I think, management and, as I said, different parts of the world after that. How did you start thinking about your kind of career after your MBA? Were you intentionally, trying to go to different places? Was that something you want to do? Or how did you line up your career in such a, exciting and interesting way?
I think that during the MBA, many of my classmates interview with many banks, many consulting firms, and they had like, I don't know, 10 banks, 10 consulting firms, and for each one they had maybe five, five interviews per company. In my case, I was lucky that 6 months after starting the MBA, I traveled back to Switzerland during winter for Christmas, and then I had a lunch with a partner at McKinsey, and they hired me on the spot.
Oh, wow.
So basically, this is why I didn't have to do any interview. And then for me, there were only two options. Either I go back to SGS, my previous company that I like very much, or I work maybe for McKinsey. So I ended up working for McKinsey in Geneva and in Zurich. And then during this time, I was in Switzerland for the school vacation. I created the Wharton Club of Geneva and the Wharton Club of Zurich. And when I created the Wharton Club of Zurich, I met one alumni, which was Mr. Schiller, who is the owner of the Schiller Group, one of the major groups in Switzerland. He also made me an offer to work for Schindler as head of the group strategic projects. So after McKinsey, I worked for Schindler on the in charge of those strategic projects. And then they sent me, the group sent me to different countries, mostly in Asia, to have line positions in the mostly in Southeast Asia, China, and Japan.
Very interesting. I think you also started a bit of your own organization while you were in Japan, right? I think called Eureka Japan. You had like a entrepreneurial career also. What made you, like decide to actually start a business? Why Japan as well? And how did you actually get that started?
Because in Japan, I'm always very strongly linked to Japan, because I grew up in Japan, because for many reasons I'm very close to Japan. So actually, when I left the Shina Group, I started my own companies. I had companies in Singapore, in Japan, and Switzerland doing e-commerce. And for me to do it in Japan was very natural, especially because we spotted an opportunity of selling European goods in Japan through the internet without having very expensive retail outlets.
Okay. Very interesting. And how, I think after that you went out and you co-founded like a few different organizations and entities as well in different kind of industries as well. I think there's cyber trading at one point and so on. So how was it like for you to, make that mindset switch? Because being an entrepreneur is a bit different from, when you're working somewhere, you have to think about things differently. You have to do a lot more of the planning and the strategy and the overall business versus than just having your individual role. So, did you have to adjust to that entrepreneurship, mindset, or did it come naturally for you?
Yes, of course, it is very different, because when basically the first company in Japan, we were selling European goods in Japan. I would say European luxury goods in Japan at I would say a especially low price, because we had a very simple infrastructure. We didn't have shop. We only had websites. And when I visited potential suppliers in Europe to buy the goods, I made a very, very wrong assumption. I thought I would be received like a king, because I was a client, I was a buyer. So there would be, but actually, they were not happy at all to see me. First, because they didn't know me. Then the volume I was ready to buy was too small for them. And then they were just afraid I would destroy their image by selling goods online, especially at discounted price, and that I would create a lot of problems for the other retailers. Um, and then if you work for a big company like McKinsey or like Schindler or like SGS, the name of the big company really helps you a lot. Everybody knows you, everybody receives you well. If you start your own company, uh, you have this phase where nobody knows you, nobody trusts you, and of course, it's not only that you don't have at the beginning revenues, you don't have salaries at the beginning. So yes, it's a new experience, but it's a very nice experience.
What do you think was the biggest thing that you learned, or other than the brand presence and so on? How were you able to grow what you were doing? Like a lot of people, there's different ways that they think about it. Either they bootstrap the business, or they look for venture investment, or they eventually just try to get in as many orders as they can and keep running as the way it is. How did you make these business decisions and so on? And how did you begin growing the company from essentially nobody knowing you to actually being able to successfully run the business?
I this is where I discover the importance of the press on the so especially in Japan. I say, okay, if we are in the press, if we manage to convince the press to talk about us as a retailer, which is fully unknown, selling goods online, and people were not trusting online goods. online sale, especially for the payment. So if the press is talking about us, it will really help people to trust us and to be known. So this is where when I started to be much closer to the press, to find ways to generate the interest in what we were doing. On things I didn't stop. We had a lot of press coverage about us in Japan, but also in Switzerland. And this really, really helped us to have sales pick up and have people trust us.
You today also you have a very good relationship with the press. I think a lot of your interviews are still, being played different parts of the in different organizations, different news outlets, and so on. How did you start building this relationship in those initial stages with the different medias, whether it was in one part of the world or another? Because it's also not easy. Like everyone wants a story, like everyone wants to find an angle. So how did you build those relationships?
So I remember that I once I approached a newspaper in Switzerland, which is more or less equivalent of the Wall Street of Switzerland. And I told them, whatever you write about e-business is completely wrong. It's really naive and wrong. And we are just repeating the advertisement of big companies like IBM, Microsoft. But it has nothing to do with reality. If you want, I make for you once per week an article about one topic about e-commerce. It can be payment, it can be fulfillment, it can be how to attract people to your website, how to make your website trusted. And initially they refuse on the then somehow a very well-known French magazine asked me to write article for them about those e-commerce topics. Then the Swiss one came to me, and then I started like this, writing for 2 or 3 newspaper about our own experience about e-commerce. And then by doing so, I interview a lot of people, including our competitors. On the Then I noticed on the media also noticed that maybe where I could add most value were by interviewing people, especially people who don't want to talk to the press because they don't feel comfortable. But they were willing to talk to me because I was also one of their peer entrepreneur.
That's a very smart way of positioning the whole, ecosystem in a sense. Today you also still, interview a lot of these business owners, a lot of these, people in the industry. How do
Yes,
you go about
I,
deciding
yes, yes.
how do you go about, making sure what you're talking about is relevant, finding the people, and then also finding which news outlet is the most relevant to be able to, take in this information, take in this, news and stories and experiences that you are getting from these business leaders.
I think that there are a lot of business people in Switzerland and elsewhere who basically they never talk to the press because they think the press is not doesn't understand what they do, is not precise, is bad attention. On, but the press is very interested in talking to them. So by the fact of being able to interview them per se, it is already very interesting for the press. And of course, you have to find interesting angle. But fundamentally, I ask them the question which are interesting for me as a business person. And since the question are interesting for me, the chance they are also interesting for other business people is rather high. And then every media has I would say specific interests. One they like I don't know automotive CEOs. Another one they prefer woman. Another one prefer I don't know big CEO of big listed companies. Another one they prefer ministers. So basically, it's relatively easy to know what they like and basically to decide on the media based on what they are interested in.
No, very. That's a very nice way to angle it in a sense. I definitely think that is a good way to be able to, capture the information and that people want to listen to, and also match it with, what the medias are focusing on, as you said. You also, I think, as you were doing this, as you were growing in this, you also had, experiences in the venture industry. From being the entrepreneur, you went into kind of being the venture partner in a sense, which is a bit different. It's like the other side of the table. What made you make that jump in a sense, and what are things that you were able to see differently in the venture partner seat now that you had the entrepreneurial experience, you had the big company experience, you even had the media experience? How did all of that help you, when you are looking at investments and that whole world of finance?
Yes, because if you are trying to attract investors, you sometimes notice that potential investors, they don't ask the right question. Sometimes they miss very important questions. On, so I think that this experience myself as an entrepreneur of raising funds from different companies helped me to be on the other side, to try to ask the right question to find out if a startup will be successful or not.
That's very helpful if you're evaluating from the other point of view. What do you think is something that most entrepreneurs don't realize until they are in the venture seat, in a sense? Or what is the thing that we entrepreneurs kind of are not aware about when we are looking for funds, when we're fundraising?
I don't know. Maybe it is the importance of the the enthusiasm, on the importance of being able to communicate this enthusiasm, because eventually people who are successful are not necessarily people who have the best ideas, but they're people who are enthusiastic enough. They can convince clients, they can convince investors, they can convince employees to join them. And if the idea are not functioning, they will change their ideas or their strategy. So I think this ability to be enthusiastic and to be able to communicate is really important. And I think that investors, they also feel this sort of vibes.
Yeah, very nice. Very good advice in a sense. I think many entrepreneurs, sometimes everyone's passionate, but I think sometimes we get, too carried away with the slides and the numbers and this, that we forget, the most important, as you said, is that enthusiasm, as is that part of it. You've worked in almost every different segment of industry in a sense, from forward facing to different countries to different roles within business, from big companies, startups to venture and so on. For a lot of people who are interested in having a career, I wouldn't say similar to yours, but as exciting as yours, in a sense, where we want to go out there, want to experience different roles, different industries, different countries, what advice would you give to students right now thinking about their careers, thinking about how their careers are going to unfold, and trying to plan and find a way to be able to live a meaningful career?
In my opinion, the most important ingredient for success is the other people's skills, the ability to connect with people, to be persistent. And then what we learn at school is, of course, very useful, but it is not the most important element. And then if we have not learned it, we will learn it somewhere later on.
Okay, very cool. And I think, final question before we end our interview for today. First of all, you have amazing answers and insights. So again, half an hour is definitely not enough for you. But as we, wrap up and begin to end for today, if, with all of these things that you've done, in a sense, what do you think has been, um, the most challenging experiences that you've had, or your biggest challenges in a sense, and how were you able to overcome those?
Um, Biggest challenge, I think maybe the biggest challenge was when I started my own companies after working for, I think, 7 years at Schindler. So I think the main challenge was Yes, I would say to generate the trust of a client, of new clients. On in our case, it was online clients with the new media, which was the internet. I would say this was a real challenge, and as I mentioned, one of the reasons we managed to do it was because we managed to convince the press to be interested in us. There were other things, but this was one important element.
So in a way, it's kind of building the brand, building, the story and the awareness about the work that you're doing
Building the
across.
brand, building the trust. I mean, I remember that the payment system was a big problem at the beginning, and we spent so much time to convince a bank to let us use a credit card online in Japan. Maybe we were the first company selling online in Japan using credit cards. And then we noticed actually nobody trusts credit card. But we also noticed that in Japan, the catalog retail doesn't work with credit cards. It basically works based on trust, which means that a Japanese client buys a good from a catalog, and then it is delivered to him with a bill, and he pays after. So there is no online payment. But in order to do this well, you need to have a system to make sure that you identify who are the customers who are likely to pay you and who are the customers who are not likely to pay you. So this is I would say, a new area that we have to understand and develop, both in Japan and in Switzerland.
Okay. So, real final question in a sense. You mentioned, the people skill is always important. Many times I feel like, when we are trying to either, start something, whether it's a business or whether it's a new project, in, that people skill is so important. As you say, you have to understand the client. You have to see, why are they reacting or acting in a certain way. What is your advice and tips for all of us to understand people better and to be able to listen and see their behavior as it is without our own biases and without our own thoughts and opinions coming and interfering between.
I think that the experience we make in extracurricular activities like student club, I think they are really useful because for the first time we have experience of leaderships, of trying to motivate people, of trying to gather people, to have them come back. Um, I think those experiences that we can do at school are very, very useful. Unfortunately, in the USA, including of course at Penn, there are many extracurricular activities. I know that in other countries they are not emphasized at all. But at Penn, yeah, we had so many activities.
And it's also about having the opportunity to build all those skills, in these activities and all before we go into the kind of real high stakes working world in a sense.
Because you organize one event. So first you have to, let's say, get maybe the speaker on the, even though you are just a student club, and you don't have a cent to pay them anything. And then you have to find a way to get the students. So you advertise, and three people come to the event. So you have to completely change your way to advertise. You have to try many things, analyze, um, until you manage to get 100 people without much effort. But there is a long process and a lot of trials and errors. And you do it as a team, maybe 5, 10 people. And I think all these experiences are really, really interesting and useful.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show, and thank you for all of this amazing wisdom. I would say, I think we covered quite a lot of different topics, a lot of different advices, things we need to work on and focus on, and a nice end point for us to have a place to practice all of this with the student clubs, with the organizations that we have right around us, and opportunities to plan these events and projects, and also very motivating for me. I'm sure very motivating for a lot of our students as well, to continue actively finding these opportunities. And thank you for being a speaker on our show, for sharing, for being the person that we reached out to, and giving back to the kind of student body, not just at Penn, but for everyone watching this online as well. So thank you for your time and all that you've been able to share with us.
Okay, thank you to you. Have a good afternoon.
Likewise, and have a lovely scenery or view of the scenery on the way to your next meeting as well. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right. And to our audience, thank you so much for watching Changing Reality. We'll catch you again next Thursday. Bye.
You're listening to Changing Reality. Changing Reality, where we bend reality all across the world. Only on WQHS Radio.